A finger moves across a page. It slides down, through the book of Daniel, the lions, the fiery furnace, the writing on the wall, and then it keeps going. Past a name, past another, past 10 more. And it lands, finally, on a new page that begins the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Matthew, the good part, the part everyone waits for. And in that little half-second slide, you just did what almost every reader of the Bible has done for 2,000 years. You skipped them. 12 books, 12 men, the last 12 voices, before 400 years of silence, and you passed over them like they were the fine print on a contract. We call them the minor prophets, and that word, minor, might be the cruelest mistake in the whole Bible. Because they were not minor. They were not small. They were not the boring stretch you have to survive before you get to something that matters. The word minor only means their books are short. That's all. In the Hebrew Bible, these 12 weren't even 12 separate books. They were written on a single scroll, and the rabbis had one name for the whole thing. They called it, simply, the 12. One voice in 12 parts, crying out across 300 years of a nation falling apart. And here is what most people miss. These are not gentlemen. One of them was ordered by God to marry a woman he knew would break his heart. One of them ran to the far end of the known world to get away from an assignment and got swallowed alive for it. One of them was a shepherd, no training, no pedigree, dirt under his nails, who walked into the richest court in the north and told the powerful their comfort was going to kill them. One of them stood in the ashes of everything he loved and did the most defiant thing a human being can do. He worshipped anyway. You have walked past these men your whole life, and they were some of the loudest voices God ever raised. So today, we're going to do the thing nobody does. We're going to stop on that page. We're going to meet all 12 of them, every single one, by name. Where they lived, who they shouted at, what it cost them, and by the end, you're going to see something running underneath all 12 books, a single thread stitched through 300 years of heartbreak that you probably never noticed. Because you were busy getting to the good part, there's one more thing I want you to hold onto before we start. The last of these 12 men said something. He wrote the final sentence of the entire Old Testament, and then heaven went quiet. No prophet, no voice, no word from God for 400 years. We are going to stand in that silence together near the end of this. And we are going to hear what finally broke it. But not yet. First, we have to go back. Back before the silence. Back to a man standing in a doorway, being handed the strangest command a prophet was ever given, a command that would turn his own marriage into a message for a nation. His name was Hosea, and God told him to go and marry a woman who was going to cheat on him. Picture a young man in the northern kingdom of Israel, about 750 years before Jesus is born. The country around him is rich. Business is good. The temples are full. And underneath all of it, something is rotting. The people have quietly traded the God who rescued them for gods that ask nothing and promise everything. And into that comfortable, rotting nation, God speaks to a man named Hosea. But he doesn't give him a sermon to preach. He gives him a command to obey. Go, God says. Take to yourself a wife of whoredom. Read that again. God tells Hosea to marry a woman who will be unfaithful to him. Not a woman who might stray. A woman he already knows will break this man's heart. Why would God ask that of anyone? Because Hosea's marriage was going to be the message. God was tired of telling Israel they were unfaithful. So he decided to show it. He took one faithful man and one unfaithful woman, and he said, "Watch. This is what my people are doing to me. This is what it feels like." So Hosea marries her. Her name is Gomer. And for a while, maybe, it's good. They have children. But God has Hosea name those children like he's naming the wounds of a nation. The first he calls Jezreel, the name of a coming bloodbath. The second, a daughter, he names Lo-Ruhamah, which means not loved. And the third he names Lo-Ammi, not my people. Imagine calling your own son at dinner. Imagine the name you have to say out loud every single day is not my people. That was Hosea's life. A walking sermon nobody wanted to hear. And then Gomer does exactly what God said she would. She leaves. She goes back to other men, other beds. She chases lovers who will use her and throw her away. And Hosea, the faithful husband, the wronged man, the one who did everything right. Hosea has every reason under heaven to be done. You know that feeling. Maybe not this exactly, but you know what it is to love someone who keeps walking out the door. To be the one who stays while they keep leaving. To give and watch it land on someone who doesn't even turn around. That's where Hosea is. And here is where it gets stranger. God comes back to him, and he does not say, "You've suffered enough. Move on." He says the opposite. He says, "Go again. Love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Go get her back." By now Gomer has fallen. So far she's standing on an auction block, a slave, being sold. And the Bible tells us Hosea walks into that market, and he pays 15 pieces of silver and a measure of barley. He counts out the price for his own wife, the woman who humiliated him, and he buys her back. He takes her home. That was the whole sermon. That was God's message to a nation that had cheated on him for 300 years. I am going to buy you back. There is a Hebrew word underneath all of this. The word is hesed. We translate it love, but that's too thin. Hesed is loyal love, covenant love, the kind of love that keeps its promise even when the other person breaks every one of theirs. It is love that has no reason left to stay and stays anyway. That's the word. That's the thread. And listen, this is only the first of the 12. Later in his book, you can almost hear God's own voice crack. He says, "How can I give you up? My heart recoils within me." That's not a judge reading a sentence. That's a husband at the door, unable to let go. Hold that ache in your chest, because the next voice we meet doesn't come with a broken marriage. He comes with a sky gone black and the sound of 100 million wings. It starts as a shadow on the horizon. A farmer in Judah looks up from his field and sees what looks like a storm cloud rolling in low, except it's moving wrong, and it's making a sound no cloud makes. A dry, grinding roar. And then it lands. Locusts. Millions of them. Tens of millions. They come down on the crops like a living blanket, and in a matter of hours a year of work, a family's food, a nation's harvest, is gone. Stripped to bare stalks. Silence. Into that ruined field steps a prophet named Joel. And Joel does something you wouldn't expect. He doesn't just mourn the bugs. He looks at that black swarm, and he says, "This is a warning. What just ate your fields is a small, crawling picture of something bigger, a day when God himself settles accounts, a day Joel calls dark and dreadful." He's the first of the 12 to put a name to it, the day of the Lord. And you'd expect a man standing in a stripped field to end there in the fear. But he doesn't. He says the God-bringing. That day is gracious and merciful, slow to anger. And then, in the middle of the wreckage, Joel says the most tender thing. God speaks through him. "I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten." Sit with that promise for a second. Not the crops, the years. God is not offering to replace a harvest. He is offering to give back time itself, the seasons you lost, the years that got eaten alive by things you couldn't stop. Every one of you watching this has a stretch of years you'd call eaten. Joel is the first man in the Bible to hear God promise them back. And there's a line in Joel you have heard before, even if you don't know it came from him. "I will pour out my spirit on all flesh." Hold on to that, because 800 years later, on the day the church is born, a fisherman named Peter will stand up in Jerusalem, point at what's happening, and quote this exact locust farmer to explain it. Joel spoke into a dead field. His words landed at Pentecost. Now watch what happens next, because the third voice doesn't come from a temple or a school. He wasn't trained for this. He didn't ask for it. He wasn't even in the right country. And that is exactly why God picked him. He comes from a sheep pen. His name is Amos, and he wants you to know he is not qualified. He says it himself. "I was no prophet. I was a herdsman and a dresser of sycamore figs." He's a working man from a dusty town called Tekoa. Dirt under his nails. And God reaches down into that sheep pen, pulls him out, and sends him north, into Israel, into the rich kingdom, into the shiny capital, where the wealthy are lying on beds of ivory, and feasting while the poor get sold for the price of a pair of sandals. And this shepherd walks in and says, God has seen it. God has seen you cheat the poor at the market. God has seen your fake worship, and he is not impressed by your songs. There's a Hebrew word at the center of everything Amos shouts. Mishpat, justice, right treatment of real people. Amos gives us the line that Martin Luther King Jr. would thunder from a podium 27 centuries later. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The powerful didn't like it. A priest named Amaziah tried to run him out of town. Go back south, prophet, and eat your bread there. But here's the part nobody tells you. They could silence the man. They could not silence the message. Amos went home. His words outlived the entire kingdom that laughed at him. The fourth voice is the shortest in the whole Bible. 21 verses. One prophet, one target, one grudge. His name is Obadiah, and his entire book is aimed at a single nation, Edom. And to understand it, you have to know that Edom wasn't a stranger. Edom was family. The Edomites descended from Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, the founder of Israel. Two brothers, one womb, and a feud that never died. When Jerusalem was attacked, the Edomites didn't help their relatives. They stood on the ridge and watched. They cheered. Some of them looted. And Obadiah looks up at Edom, perched high in their mountain fortress, feeling untouchable. And they had reason to feel that way. The Edomites carved their homes into the face of sheer red cliffs, cities in the rock you could only reach through a crack in the stone a single soldier could hold. Nobody got in. Nobody could touch them. And Obadiah looks up at all that stone and says, the pride of your heart has deceived you. You think your cliffs will save you. They won't. God says, though you soar like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down. And he did. Edom is gone, a ghost in the desert, while the brother they gloated over is still read in every church on earth. 21 verses about the oldest, most bitter truth in any family, that the ones who share your blood can wound you deepest of all. And that gloating over a brother's funeral has a way of digging your own grave. Which brings us to the most famous runaway in history. You know the fish. Almost everyone knows the fish. But you may have missed the reason he ran. God tells a prophet named Jonah to go to Nineveh, and Nineveh isn't just a foreign city. It is the capital of Assyria, the most feared, most brutal military empire on earth. These are the people who tortured captives for sport. And God says, go warn them, so I can spare them. So Jonah runs, not out of fear, out of hate. He gets on a ship going the exact opposite direction, because he would rather die than watch God forgive his enemies. And you know the rest. The storm, the sea, the great fish, 3 days in the dark. He gets vomited onto the shore, and finally, grudgingly, walks into Nineveh and preaches the shortest, angriest sermon in the Bible. 8 words, 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. And the unthinkable happens. The whole city repents. From the king down to the cattle, they turn. And God spares them. Jonah is furious. He storms off, sits on a hill, and sulks. And the book of Jonah ends. This is one of the strangest endings in Scripture. It ends with God asking Jonah a question. Should I not pity Nineveh, that great city? And then nothing. No answer. The book just stops. God asks whether mercy is allowed to be that wide, and he leaves the question hanging in the air for Jonah to sit with. For you to sit with. Remember that city. Remember Nineveh was spared. Because we are going to come back to Nineveh, and the second time, no one is going to be laughing, and no one is going to be spared. But that's later. Stay with me, because we've now met 4 of the 12, and a pattern is starting to show through the cracks. Let me pause here for 1 second, because if you're still with me this far in, you're exactly the kind of person these 12 men were writing for. So do me a quick favor. If any part of this has made you see this skipped corner of the Bible a little differently, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find these forgotten voices. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Of the 12, which one have you personally skipped the most? Be honest. Nobody's judging. Mine was Obadiah for about 15 years. Okay, back to it. because we've heard the ache and the mercy. Now the sky gets darker, and the next two men carry a heavier weight. The fifth voice comes from a village so small you drive past it without slowing down. A place called Moresheth, out in the low country of Judah. And that matters, because the man from that village, his name is Micah, spent his life speaking up for people exactly like the ones he grew up with. The farmers, the poor, the families whose land got swallowed up by rich men who knew how to work the system. Micah lived at the same time as the great prophet Isaiah. But where Isaiah moved among kings, Micah stayed close to the dirt. And he watched the powerful in Jerusalem build their fortunes on the backs of people who had nothing, then walk into the temple on Saturday and act holy. It made him sick, and out of that anger, Micah gives us one of the most quoted verses in the entire Bible, a verse people hang on their walls without knowing a village prophet said it first. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly. That's it. Not 100 rituals, not a mountain of sacrifices. 3 things a farmer from Moresheth could understand, and that a king in his palace kept getting wrong. But here's what most people miss about Micah. Tucked into his little book, this small-town prophet says something that should stop you cold. He points at a nothing town, a village even smaller than his own, and he says the ruler of all Israel is going to come out of it. The town's name? Bethlehem. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one, who is to be ruler in Israel. Understand how strange that is. If you wanted to name the birthplace of a king, you'd say a capital. You'd say Jerusalem, with its palace and its gold. Micah names a farm town, a wide spot in the road known for one thing, sheep. And he doesn't hedge it. He gives the region, Ephrathah, so there's no confusing it with any other Bethlehem. He is dropping a pin on a map 7 centuries before the event, on a village so unimportant that its only claim to fame, up to that point, was that a shepherd boy named David had once been anointed there. Micah wrote that 700 years before a baby was born in that exact town. 700 years. And notice where God keeps choosing to work. Not the palace, the pasture. Not the capital, the crack in the map. Hold that number, and hold that name, because we are going to watch these forgotten men do this again and again, describe a face none of them would ever live to see. Now, remember Nineveh? Back in Jonah's story, the great enemy city repented, and God spared it. Mercy won. The people cheered. That was around 760 years before Christ. Fast forward roughly 100 years. A new prophet steps forward, a man named Nahum, from a town we can barely locate. And his entire book is about one subject. Nineveh, the same city. But everything has changed, because Nineveh took the mercy God gave it, and then it went right back to being a monster. And you need to understand what that means, because we say brutal empire. So easily it stops meaning anything. The Assyrians turned terror into policy. They carved their own atrocities into the walls of their palaces as decoration, art you were meant to admire. Prisoners flayed alive, and their skins nailed up on city gates. Heads stacked in pyramids outside conquered towns. Whole populations marched off, with hooks through their lips. They didn't hide it. They advertised it, so the next city would surrender out of sheer terror. This was the machine God had spared 100 years earlier when it fell to its knees. And now it had gone right back to the walls, and the hooks, and the pyramids of heads. It crushed nations. It skinned prisoners alive, and bragged about it on its palace walls. The city that had been spared became, once again, the most brutal empire on earth. And Nahum stands up and delivers the verdict Jonah always wanted to hear. It's over. This time, judgment is coming, and it will not be turned back. An overflowing flood, Nahum says, God will make a complete end of its sight. And here's the part nobody tells you. That prophecy came true, so completely that Nineveh didn't just fall, it vanished. In 612 BC, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes tore the city apart, and over the centuries the ruins were buried, so thoroughly under the sand, that people forgot it had ever been real. For a long stretch of history, skeptics pointed at the Bible and said Nineveh was a myth, a made-up place. Until the 1840s, when archaeologists dug into a mound in what is now northern Iraq and pulled a lost empire back out of the earth, the palaces, the libraries, the very walls Nahum said would be swept away. He was right down to the site. Now put Jonah and Nahum side by side, because this is the thread most readers walk straight past. The same city, spared in one book, destroyed in the other. What's the difference? 100 years and a choice. Nineveh was shown mercy, real mercy, and mistook it for permission. That's the quiet, terrifying truth running under both stories. Mercy is real, but mercy has a clock on it. God's patience is not the same thing as God's blindness. And a warning ignored long enough eventually becomes a warning fulfilled. But even here, even in a book about a city getting erased, Nahum can't help himself. Right in the middle of all that judgment, he stops and says, "The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble." He knows those who take refuge in him. Even the angriest of the 12 keeps one hand open for anyone still willing to run to God instead of from him. Hold that thought, because the next man is going to take that same God, the good one, the stronghold, and do something almost nobody in the Bible dares to do. He's going to argue with him, to his face. Most prophets deliver God's words to the people. Habakkuk does something else. Habakkuk turns around, faces God, and demands answers. He's living in Judah in the final years, before everything falls apart. Babylon is rising in the east like a thunderhead, and all around Habakkuk he sees violence, corruption, the strong eating the weak, and God seems to be doing nothing. So he doesn't preach. He complains. He looks straight up and says, "O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Why do you make me see wrong and idly look at wrong?" Read that again, because it might be the most honest sentence in the Bible. How long? Why won't you do something? Every one of you has prayed that prayer. The diagnosis that didn't change. The marriage that kept sliding. The child who kept walking away. The nights you asked the ceiling how long, and the ceiling said nothing. That's Habakkuk. He is you, on your worst night, with the courage to say it out loud to God. And here's the strange, holy thing. God answers him. He doesn't strike him down for asking. God actually responds, though the answer is harder than the question. God says, "I am doing something. I'm going to use Babylon to discipline my people." And Habakkuk is horrified, because Babylon is worse than the people it's coming to punish. So he asks again, and in the back and forth, God gives Habakkuk a single line that will echo for the next 26 centuries. "The righteous shall live by his faith." That one sentence, "the righteous shall live by faith," is the verse the Apostle Paul will build the entire book of Romans on. It's the verse that, 1,500 years after that, a tormented monk named Martin Luther will read by candlelight and feel the whole weight of his guilt fall off his back, the spark that lit the Reformation. A depressed prophet arguing with God in a collapsing country handed the future a sentence that would remake the world. And he never knew it. But it's how Habakkuk ends that breaks you open. By the last chapter, he knows the invasion is coming. He knows he's going to lose everything, the crops, the herds, the security, all of it. And instead of one more complaint, he writes this: "Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord." Understand what that is. This is not a man who got his way. This is not a man whose problems were solved. This is not a man singing because the storm passed. This is a man singing because God is still God while the storm is still coming. Worship with empty hands. Joy with nothing left in it but God. That might be the bravest thing any of the 12 ever did. And right on the heels of that raw, defiant faith comes a prophet of royal blood. His name is Zephaniah, and he carries a rare thing, a family line that traces back to King Hezekiah himself. Think about that. This is not an outsider like Amos. This is a man with royal blood who could have spent his life comfortable inside the palace, and instead he stands in the street and tells his own class the party is over. He prophesies during a brief, bright window when a good young king named Josiah is tearing down idols and trying to drag the nation back to God. Zephaniah is the voice in the king's ear during the last real revival before the end, and most of his book is heavy. He warns, like the others, about the coming day of the Lord, a day of wrath and darkness. But then, near the end, this royal prophet writes something so tender it almost doesn't fit in a book of judgment. He describes what God feels toward the people he is bringing home, and he says, "The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one, who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing." Stop on that last image. God singing, not just tolerating his people, not just forgiving them, singing over them, the way a mother sings, over a baby she can't stop staring at. The same God who thunders judgment through 11 of these books leans down in Zephaniah and hums a lullaby over the very people who broke his heart. That's the tension living inside all 12 of these men at once. Justice and tenderness, the raised voice and the low song. And every one of them is circling the same aching question without fully knowing it. How does a holy God stay furious at sin and still be crazy about the sinner? They didn't have the full answer. Not yet, but we're getting close now. We've met 10 of the 12. 2 remain, and to reach them, we have to cross the worst thing that ever happened to these people. We have to go through the fire, past the ruins of Jerusalem, into exile, and out the other side. Before we walk into that fire, one last thing. If you've made it this far, through 10 prophets, through broken marriages and locust skies, and a man singing in the dark, then you're not a skimmer. You're a reader, and these last 2 prophets are the ones that tie the whole thing together. So if you want more deep dives into the parts of the Bible everyone rushes past, subscribe and stick around. There's so much more buried in here. Now, the city falls. The temple burns. The people are dragged 1,000 miles from home. And it's on the far side of that ruin that the final 2 voices are waiting. For 70 years, the people sit in exile in Babylon. The temple is rubble. The city is ash. And to a whole generation, it looks like the story is simply over, like God closed the book and walked away. But he doesn't. A new empire, Persia, rises and lets a broken remnant go home. They straggle back to Jerusalem, a few thousand of them, and they find ruins, weeds where the temple stood. And here's what happens to people who've been beaten down that hard. They stop trying. They build little houses for themselves. They scrape out a living. And the house of God just sits there, a pile of blackened stone, year after year. Into that discouragement steps the 10th from last voice, a prophet named Haggai. And Haggai's message is blunt, almost impatient. He looks at the people living in their finished, paneled homes while God's house lies in ruins, and he says, "Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses, while this house lies in ruins? Get up, rebuild, stop waiting to feel ready." And it works. Under a governor named Zerubbabel, the people pick up their tools, and the temple rises again. But here's the detail that gets me. When the foundation went down, the Bible says the old men, who remembered the first temple, Solomon's temple, the glorious one, wept out loud, because this new one looked so small and poor by comparison. And into that grief, God gives Haggai one more line to carry. "The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former." Don't measure it by what you lost. This small, plain house will one day hold a glory the gold one never did, because one day the Messiah himself will walk through its courts. Haggai is the prophet of the second wind, the voice that gets you off the floor when you've decided it's too late to start again, and the one who promises the humble second try can outshine the glorious first. Working right beside Haggai is the 11th voice, and this one is different. His name is Zechariah, and where Haggai is practical, Zechariah is on fire, with visions, strange, glowing pictures of the future. Let me show you just one of them, because it may be the most beautiful thing in any of the 12. Zechariah sees the high priest, a real man named Joshua, standing in the courtroom of heaven, and Joshua is filthy. His priestly robes are caked in filth, and standing at his right hand is Satan, the accuser, pointing at every stain, listing every reason this man should be thrown out. It's the picture of every one of you on your worst day, dragged into the light, with everything you've done hanging off you, and a voice reading the list. And then God speaks. He doesn't argue the charges. He just says, "Take off his filthy clothes." And he turns to Joshua and says, "Behold, I have taken your iniquity away from you, and I will clothe you with pure vestments." The accuser goes silent. The filth comes off. Clean clothes go on. That is the gospel, painted 500 years before anyone had a word for it. A guilty man declared clean, not because the charges were false, but because God chose to cover him. And buried in those visions, this prophet does the thing we watched Micah do. He describes a face he will never live to see. Listen to what Zechariah writes about the coming king. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey." A king, but not on a war horse, on a donkey. Zechariah wrote that around 500 years before, a man named Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the back of a young donkey, while crowds threw their coats on the road and shouted. Palm Sunday. The scene was written half a millennium before it happened by a prophet almost nobody reads. And that brings us, finally, to the last voice. Remember, at the very beginning, I told you about a man who would speak the final words of the Old Testament, and then heaven would go quiet? I asked you to hold that. This is him. His name is Malachi. His name literally means my messenger. And by his time, the fire of the early prophets has cooled into something sadder. The temple's rebuilt, but the people have gone lukewarm. They're cutting corners in worship, cheating on their spouses, robbing God and asking, with a straight face, "How have we robbed you?" They're going through the motions. And Malachi's job is to be the last one to try to wake them up. But even Malachi, the closer, the final voice, can't help pointing forward. He delivers a promise. "Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me." And then the very last words of the entire Old Testament, in the book of Malachi. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." And then, nothing. The page ends. And for 400 years, for centuries, God says nothing. No prophet stands up. No vision comes. No voice in the night. Empires rise and fall. Greece conquers. Rome conquers. Generations are born and die under that silence. And the last thing anyone had heard from heaven was an old prophet promising a messenger who never seemed to come. I want you to feel what that silence actually was, because you know it. You have sent the message that never got a reply. You've prayed into a ceiling and heard nothing come back. You've stood at a grave or in an empty house or in the worst hour of your life and waited for God to say something, anything, and got only the quiet. That waiting, that ache of speaking into a void, wondering if anyone is even there on the other side, that was the whole world for 400 years. The 12 had spoken, and then heaven held its breath. And here is where it gets remarkable. After 400 years of silence, the quiet finally breaks. And it doesn't break in a temple, or a palace, or a school of priests. It breaks out in the wilderness, by a muddy river, in the throat of a wild-looking man in camel's hair, and the very first thing he does is prepare the way. He is the messenger Malachi promised. His name is John, and the voice that had gone silent for 4 centuries comes roaring back, with the sound of a man shouting, "Prepare the way of the Lord." Every promise those 12 forgotten men made, the buying back of Hosea, the poured-out spirit of Joel, the justice of Amos, the Bethlehem of Micah, the faith of Habakkuk, the singing God of Zephaniah, the donkey-riding king of Zechariah, all of it had been circling one face. One person, the answer to the question none of them could finish. How does a holy God stay furious at sin and still be crazy about the sinner? And 400 years after the last of them laid down his pen, that answer walked out of Nazareth with dust on his feet. So let me leave you with 3 things to carry out of this. First, the simple one. These 12 books are not 12 random complaints. There is one word humming underneath almost all of them, a Hebrew word, shuv. It means to turn, to come back, to return. Turn around. Come home. 12 different men in 12 different disasters across 300 years, and God is saying the same thing through every one of them. Come back to me. That's the thread. That's what you were skipping. Second, and this one's closer to home, the part of the Bible you skip is often the part that's actually about you. It's easy to love the stories where the sea splits and the giant falls. But these 12 men were writing to ordinary people in a slow-motion collapse. People who were comfortable, distracted, going through the motions, cutting a few corners. Sure, they had time. That's not ancient history. That's a Tuesday. These forgotten prophets were speaking to the exact life most of us are actually living. And third, the one I really want you to feel. Every one of these men spoke into what looked like an empty room. Hosea preached with his own broken marriage. Amos got laughed out of court. Habakkuk yelled at a silent sky. Malachi spoke the last word and watched the lights go out for 400 years. Not one of them got to see the ending. Not one of them saw the face all their promises were pointing toward. They spoke into the dark, trusting someone was listening, and 4 centuries after the last of them was gone, every word came true walking on 2 feet out of Nazareth. They were not shouting into a void. They were building a road, and they never got to walk on it. Which makes me wonder about you. So here's my question, and I really do want your answer in the comments. Of these 12, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, which one had you skipped the longest? And which one are you going to go back and actually read tonight? Tell me below. I read them. Because here's the truth. The next time your finger slides down the page, past Daniel, racing to get to Matthew, and the good part, I hope it slows down. I hope it stops. Right there. In that stretch everybody skips are 12 men who gave their whole lives to a message they never saw come true so that you could hold the ending in your hands. Don't skip them again.